John Truby, The Anatomy of Story. This video is sponsored by Squarespace. There are some ideas in this book that are okay, par for the course, writer stuff. And then there are some ideas in this book that will cost you brain cells. One of my least favorites is premise being more important than execution. He insists upon this. He says a thing can fall apart on the premise level. I think this is almost insidiously stupid. Here's a premise. A 1950s housewife living with her husband in a utopian experimental community begins to worry that his glamorous company may be hiding disturbing secrets. Can you spot what's wrong with that premise, John? Can you point to it? It satisfies all your good premise requirements. But 100 writers could take that one sentence and write 100 different movies from it, and only one did, and it's Don't Worry Darling, generally regarded as a nonsensical story. Blake Snyder, who I'll get to later, understands the practical value of a premise. John Truby does not. John also hates terms. It's literally on page 1. He hates how these terms have been constricting writers. He hates the 3-act structure like it beat him up in middle school. But then he goes on to introduce his own term, which is so much worse. John Truby's magnum opus is the designing principle. In his own words, designing principle equals story process plus original execution. What does this mean? I don't know, neither does he. He gives several examples and they all point to completely different qualities of the story as being this designing principle. Timeline, execution gimmicks, archetypes, underlying emotional arcs. It's clear that he's trying to nail down some X factor and coin a term, but it's super contrived. And then he has the gall to say, the designing principle is difficult to see. I'm like, yeah, you made it up, dude. Oh, and remember kids, the theme is the brain, but the designing principle is the nucleus. Yeah, don't forget that, super important. I remember reading this when I was 15 and thinking to myself, wow, this must be really advanced because I can't wrap my head around it. And nope. I don't know if you guys know this, but I hate the word theme now. That's my latest development because it's a catch-all word with half a dozen definitions. But the definition John uses is the theme as your message to the audience. I don't have an issue with this in principle, but I despise how he thinks it's the whole point of storytelling. Like, go away, John. I'm allowed to ruminate on the human condition. The hero is the viewer, and so the viewer learns what the hero learns. Yeah, if you're 4 years old. Page 121, the audience sees which ideas and values are superior. Like, oh, okay. I'm not saying stories don't influence people's views. I'm not saying that one's own moral views don't bleed into stories. They do. But to insist that this is the objective of storytelling itself? Disgusting. Shut up. For me, the best writing advice tells you how to get the results you want. It doesn't tell you what you should care about or what your goals should be. In addition to being condescending, this is also very limiting in terms of the kinds of stories you can create. I love differentiation. I love giving characters different perspectives and having them clash. And so does John. He literally says variation on a theme. Except for John, themes are moral messages. So differentiation just means some people are righter and some people are wronger. That's what that has to mean within his methodology. Of course, he could just be contradicting himself. The guy really keeps you on your toes. Like a lot of Hollywood boomers, John Truby carries around this blanket reverence for the great stories of all time. And it's one thing to admire craftsmanship, but that's not what John is doing. Great for John just means big, successful cultural touchstone. There will be a list. Casablanca, Citizen Kane, but then of course he puts Star Wars on it. Star Wars being on all these great stories lists gives me the same vibe as like the coach's kid being on the team. But what do you mean? It's Star Wars. Of course it's the pinnacle of storytelling, even though the characters are barely even characters. For Truby, there's some zeitgeist, some holy wavelength that makes the great stories what they are. But I think chasing that is literally the biggest problem in the writing community. The bar shouldn't be some nebulous public acclaim. I think that's a super insecure way of looking at it. And it is ridiculous to imply that the commercial or cultural success of Star Wars hinges on its screenplay. Have you read that thing? Or that the commercial and cultural success of any movie hinges on its screenplay. A screenplay is just a starting point. It's not the whole movie. It's not the whole phenomenon of a thing. But Lucas, what about the hero's journey? I don't care for the hero's journey. I think it is overly, needlessly specific. I don't care for archetypes in general. If I see an archetype, it's on site. John, on the other hand, loves archetypes. He loves anything that sounds ancient and objective. Guys, you don't get it. Harry Potter is a prince who learns to become a man and a king. Okay. But he fails to show how archetypes are useful. If this was advertised as a book about demystifying why we love stories, sure, talk about archetypes, but you said this was a practical guide. If a thing isn't useful, stop saying it's important. He just incessantly hammers the archetypes thing, and it goes nowhere. It never actually plugs into the writing process. He bows at the altar of the hero. Like, why does it have to be the hero? Why is it always hero, hero? I think that's super limiting. Why can't we just have characters? Oh, and the buddy should be similar to the hero in important ways, but also different. What are you talking about? You came out of the gate swinging against terms, but you're insisting on referring to characters by the most useless terms possible. Like, thank you for informing me that Odysseus is a trickster. I'm going to take that information and do absolutely nothing with it. But I don't hate everything in this book. When Truby gets out of archetype great story reverence mode, he has some genuinely good insights. In the later chapters, he talks about world building and setting, and he does like the best version of what Writergram does, where you list off a bunch of cool things a person could do in their story, but they're like just options, except he's very detailed. He talks about using mountains and rivers and roads as framing devices. I like it a lot. And he's very thorough in those chapters. He has some great nuggets, like a high concept premise only gives you 2 or 3 scenes. Yeah, I can literally recall instances of that holding me back. He's totally right. Says a character is a range of possibilities. I've said that before. I literally ripped it from this book. 4-corner opposition is fine, I guess, but alas, the anatomy of story is mostly just messy theory. John, if you're watching this, I'm sorry I had to be so mean. I know you're an accomplished dude, but I just really don't like your book.
Coffee.
Pilar Alessandra, the coffee break screenwriter. Pilar released this in 2010, but she went back and did a second edition in 2016 to account for the changing landscape of TV, which I appreciate. It exemplifies the humility and pragmatism that informs everything else in this book. Pilar comes right out and says, every screenwriting teacher has a theory about story, here's mine. And the theory in question, emotion triggers action, action triggers emotion, didn't break my brain or anything, but just the fact that she framed it in that way is something I wish I was exposed to as a kid trying to uncover the one true storytelling method. There are many methodologies. There is no Ark of the Covenant perfect, foolproof strategy for screenwriting. Here's mine, you can take it or leave it. The entire conceit of this book is that it's a step-by-step guide to writing a screenplay that's broken into 10-minute chunks. Pilar understands that the average writer is a hobbyist who has to work a 9-to-5 to get by, so every step in this book could be carried out on a coffee break. I haven't tried it because my schedule looks a little different, but it's definitely possible to write a feature screenplay or TV pilot using the steps in this book, at least by my estimation. Will it be the greatest thing ever? Probably not. There's a lot of just pick one and move on in this book. But the goal is to get a draft. Turner and I wrote a draft in a week by staying in just pick one and move on mode. I think that go, go, go mindset is really good when you're building something from nothing. It becomes less feasible when you've been working on a thing for years and you're attached to certain elements. This book is not designed as a bundle of tactics you can revisit. It's designed to help you build a story from start to finish. 10 minutes or not though, I'm definitely on the same page as Pilar when it comes to the process. General structure, beat sheet, scene list, draft. There's some really great stuff in here, and it's all in plain English. Pilar thinks in extremes. What's the worst thing that could happen to this character? I'm a fan of this. She also mirrors my sentiments about flaws, that good compulsions can be just as unhealthy as evil ones, which I think is the key to understanding people in general. Pilar is also a good teacher because she knows exactly when to stop explaining something so that your brain can take over. Like, she'll break down a scene and explain its components, but then in the next demo scene, she just copies and pastes it with no breakdown, and she asks you to identify those components yourself. It's impossible to read Coffee Break Screenwriter passively. It's pretty much a giant workbook. Pilar also understands that stylistic choices are interchangeable. Some writers get hung up on the exact way to word something. Pilar just uses placeholders. I think people have misconceptions about first drafts, and they think the first draft should just be nonsense because it has to be nonsense. But the first draft should only be stylistically messy. There's no reason it can't have consistent characters and a functional plot. You have to understand the hierarchy from general to specific. If you don't think hierarchically, every sentence is going to overwhelm you because it all feels equally important. Pilar thinks in terms of passes. Leave dialogue placeholders, come back and fix them on the dialogue pass, etc. The end of this book is really cool. It's just Pilar asking all of her screenwriter friends what they would do if they had 10 minutes to make a script better. And the diversity of answers again speaks to the fact that there's no one right way to do this stuff. Cool little book. Blake Snyder, Save the Cat. This is a book about the industry. With Truby, occasionally he'll throw in, this is what producers like, or this is what audiences want, and it's super jarring because The Anatomy of Story isn't about that, but Save the Cat is explicitly, from page one, a trade book. How to communicate your ideas, how to sell your script to money people, what producers look for. In chapter 1, Snyder talks about his own accomplishments and why he's qualified to do this. I did thing, I sold thing, I worked with Spielberg, which would make me roll my eyes if this was just a storytelling theory book, but business is objective. Did the line go up? Did the script make money? Yes or no? That's not the same as talking about storytelling as an art form. I do wish he drew that distinction himself, because it does sound like he's saying the only people qualified to talk about storytelling are the people who've made money from it, and I shouldn't have to explain to you why that's atrocious, but within the context of what he's trying to do here, it's in bounds. From the prologue, these books are way too academic. They treat movies with way too much awe and respect. They're just movies. I think it gets in the way. Wouldn't it be nice if a book about how to write a screenplay used the kind of shorthand that screenwriters and movie executives use? Yes, I'm so on board. The titular phrase of the book refers to a scene where the hero does something that makes the audience like them. My immediate knee-jerk reaction to this is, but that's marketing, not storytelling. What does likable even mean? It's so shallow and limiting. But again, this is an industry book. I asked a friend of mine who's been in the industry for like 20 years and has pitched a lot of movies, and he basically explained it like Save the Cat is a self-fulfilling prophecy. So producers will go to page 5 of your script and they'll be like, oh, is your theme stated? But they do that because of Save the Cat, because they see it as a way to make money. So the book matters, but its contents have mattered more since it became so popular. But yeah, as far as Blake's actual story tactics go, it's pretty simple, universal stuff. His beat board is more or less like mine. Mine leans harder into characters, his leans more into plot beats, but we're all converging on the same stuff here for the most part. The first chapter of Save the Cat was absolutely instrumental for me back in the day. It's about the logline title combo. Basically, if you can't explain your story simply in a way that paints a clear mental picture and implies a target audience, nobody's going to give you the time of day. I've met so many writers who I think were legitimate geniuses who just did not have the communication skills to survive in the industry. Pope in the Pool. I use that tactic by that name all the time. If something boring is happening, characters talking in rooms, just throw in a weird thing. Just force the scene to be interesting. Blake Snyder is also the only writer whose ideas about genre I can actually get behind. Usually I hate genre. It makes me want to drink cement. Like, horror is a genre of fiction whose purpose is to create feelings of fear, dread, repulsion, and terror in the audience. The Western is a genre set in the American frontier and commonly associated with folk tales of the Western United States. Film noir is a genre defined in part by black and white and low-key cinematography. And drama, don't even get me started on this one, is a genre of fiction intended to be more serious than humorous in tone. So we have tonal categories, subject matter categories, and stylistic categories. But they're all lumped into one list of film categories, and none of it is practical. But Blake Snyder throws all this out and creates a whole new list of genres that transcend aesthetic. Mainstream genres are certainly beloved by filmmakers and filmgoers alike, but Blake's genres are for writers. He has 10 categories which cut straight to the heart of the narrative. Again, this is about industry success, not artistic vision. Once you figure out which category your movie it is, you can figure out what beats it still needs, given the other movies that have been in the same type of category. He gives exemplar movies for each category that you can study, but he doesn't start with these movies and dissect their esoteric greatness. He just says, this script got produced because it had certain attributes. If you want your script to get produced, it should do those things too. Some stuff in this book I'm iffy on. Blake places a lot of emphasis on primal drives because they're universal, but that's exactly why I'm hesitant to center them. I'd rather refract them through more specific coping mechanisms, or ask how a character's maladaptive patterning prevents them from satisfying those primal human drives. But either way, the needs aren't the central object. This is really just an issue of emphasis though. I don't disagree with base needs in principle. I just don't think that they're character building blocks in the way Blake Snyder says they are. Okay, let me talk about Squarespace because it's the raddest thing ever. When I was looking into different platforms to build my consulting website, I found that Squarespace was the smoothest by far. I am not technologically inclined, what even is code? But I was able to wrap my head around Squarespace in a matter of minutes, in part because of this thing called the Fluid Engine, which auto-converts your site to different screen sizes. Super helpful. And you don't have to build anything from scratch either. Squarespace has all kinds of templates to suit your every need. I mean, I could have custom built this if I wanted to, but for my purposes, all I had to do was pick a template I liked, change some colors, add some text, and that was it. My website was ready to rock. With the push of a button, I was able to pencil in testimonials, link my calendar to schedule bookings, upload my worksheets, and make edits instantly. Not to mention everything else Squarespace does. Merch, payment systems, it's the perfect tool for all your website building needs. I've been using it for months and I haven't had a single issue. So head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/localscriptman to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Take my word for it, Squarespace, baby. So I want to say something that's probably more important than any of the ideas in any of these books. I firmly believe that there's a right and a wrong way to consume this type of content. If you read these books, if you watch my videos, if you go into any writing education without a project in your mind, there's a good chance none of it is going to be helpful. It's like going to the Home Depot to buy tools, except you don't actually need tools for anything. So you're just like, oh, I kind of like this tool. And then you walk up to me in 2019 when I worked at Home Depot and you're like, excuse me, sir, is this a good tool to buy? And I'm like, well, it depends. What's your project? Oh, I don't know. Well, then I can't tell you if the tool is a good fit or not. And then you think the problem is that there aren't enough examples, that there aren't enough exercises. That's bullshit. The problem is you're consuming instructional content, but you have nowhere to direct that knowledge. Your brain has no reason to process anything. It's going to go in one ear and out the other. Have an idea and then dive into this stuff. John Truby's 200 million pop culture examples are not going to tell you what you should do in your story. I'm reading/rereading these books during development on a bigger project I'm writing for, and when I encounter an idea, I weigh it against the story that's in my brain. To be honest, most of the time, I'm either already doing the thing in the book or I just blatantly disagree with it, and it's just not helpful. But once in every 100 pages, something will stick out and a light bulb will go off. Like I was going through Blake Snyder's genres and I realized, oh shit, this is a fool triumphant movie. This is like Forrest Gump. And I told the director and he was like, oh my God, yeah, I could totally sell this as being like Forrest Gump. That movie made a ton of money. I read Pilar's book with one of my super underdeveloped horror ideas in mind and realized I was stuck because I didn't have an ending to work backward from. So I refocused my efforts. Your light bulb moments will be different from my light bulb moments. I'm not even going to tell you which books to read. Read all of them. They literally contradict each other. So if you don't find yourself disagreeing with anything, you are 100% doing it wrong. The point is to build your own toolkit of things that work for you. The first time I read Anatomy of Story back in 2016 or whatever, I highlighted the dumbest shit. Anything that looked like an equation, anything that looked scientific and objective. Because I was insecure in my creativity. I was looking for an authority. I didn't know what I wanted, so I was looking for someone to tell me what to build as opposed to looking for the right tool. But that's just my 2 cents. Video's over. I know I'm going to do the hero with 1,000 faces as part of the next Pokemon card pack. I'm going to cover Sid Field eventually, Dan O'Bannon. Some of these I've read, some I haven't. If you have any recommendations, spill the beans. Spill them all over me. Ooh yeah, like that. Spill those beans. But this series will take a long time. It's not a priority. That's it. That's all. If you appreciate my ideas and want the algorithm to notice me, hit that thing, that little thummy thumb. I'll see you next time.